Hello again, and welcome to A Likely Story, already episode 2. OMG, they said it would never last. Here we are again, though. And thanks very, very much for joining us. I'm your host, Grafton Stringer. Well, we're coming to you again from the ALS Worldwide Headquarters here in sunny Florida. That's right, Florida, the birthplace of personal responsibility and sound decision-making. Yes, everyone in America knows what we're full of here in the Sunshine State, dreams. And I'm sure that that's the first word that came to your mind. Well, one Florida man had the dream of making our highways safer. You know, we've all had that experience where we're driving down the road and we see someone in the car next to us talking away on their cell phone or texting. And like everyone else, I shake my head judgmentally, get a little angry and think to myself, what a dangerous, thoughtless jerk. And then my phone rings. Well, here in Florida, we don't just dream of changing the world, we act. Like 60-year-old Jason Humphreys. He's a man of action. Presumably after shaking his fist and groaning failed to have the desired effect, he took steps to equip his car with this thing. A wideband cell phone jammer. And his master plan to jam cell phone signals and keep Florida's highways safer and less annoying worked perfectly. For a while, Humphreys was free to drive to work on Interstate 4 while somehow managing to avoid accidents of his own deep inside his lair, wringing his hands and going, wah. But cell phone carrier Metro PCS started noticing that every day over the past 2 years, their cell phone towers were experiencing unexplained interference at exactly the same time, during morning and evening commutes. After law enforcement and the FCC investigated, it was discovered the interference was coming from Humphrey's blue Toyota Highlander. And it turns out that jamming cell phone signals is more than just a little illegal. Now, a wireless device was able to keep people off of their phones long enough so that they couldn't find out the important business, like if Chad was totally ghosting Brittany. It also had the pesky effect of blocking out 911 calls for whiny little matters like fires and medical emergencies. For that reason, and just for forcing too many parents to actively engage in conversation with their kids, the FCC slapped Humphreys with a $48,000 fine, and in a written statement, the judge in the case said this. Now, I'm not sure what the eggplant means, but then again, I'm not an attorney. Another dreamer, Raisa back in late April, attempted to live out his months-long dream of crossing the Atlantic from the east coast of Florida to Bermuda in a large inflatable hydropod that in no way resembles a giant hamster ball. Now, his dream was a worthy one, with a goal of raising $850,000 for children in need around the world. And sure, it may be a near impossible journey of more than 1,000 miles over rough seas, but he is ready. Take a look. Now, sure, there's always going to be haters, everyone around him looking skeptical, but Raisa has a dream. Raisa has the training. He has the latest cutting-edge technology of soccer balls filled with air. So with clear eyes, a full heart, and presumably cheeks filled with nuts and assorted dried fruits, off he goes. Go, Raisa, go! Oh, well, he's not really making any progress at all, but look at the heart on this guy. I think he might actually... Okay, I'm sorry, I'm being told that the Coast Guard had to be called to rescue Raisa after only 7 miles. That's right, after just 7 miles, the Coast Guard pulled Raisa out of the water, a bit dazed from the 120-degree heat inside his hydropod, and covered in cedar shavings. Spoiler alert, sometimes dreams don't match reality. And as it turns out, the Coast Guard and Raisa are something close to old friends by now. You see, he tried this trip once before, back in November of 2014, and he had to be rescued then too. A rescue that, according to the Coast Guard, cost taxpayers more than $140,000. And in a letter sent to Raisa by the Coast Guard a week before his attempt, he was told that because his plan lacked a support and escort boat or any other reasonable safety measures, they, quote, hereby order you not to depart because the vessel and the conditions under which you're attempting to complete your voyage to Bermuda is unsafe. Well, at least it's not all bad news. There's still the $850,000 Raisa planned to raise for children around the world, of which he came up short by only $849,963. Yes, it looks like Raisa raised $37 from just one donor. But the good news is that may be just enough money for swimming lessons or to start his new dream of building a 1,000-mile habit trail from Florida to Bermuda so he can just jog there. Now, just like with Cell Phone Guy and Hamster Ball Man, personal responsibility and freedom are not always BFF in this country. We love our rights and freedoms in America, as we should. But there's also a social contract. Our rights come with responsibilities and common sense limitations. Like, we have freedom of speech, but you can't run into a crowded theater and yell fire. Limitation. We have freedom of the press, but you can't libel or slander someone. Reasonable limitation. We have freedom of religion, but if a church engages in excessive political activity, it can lose its tax-exempt status. Seems reasonable. And we have the right to bear arms, but... okay, maybe that's a bad example. For instance, just in the last few days, common sense took a holiday up north when a Chicago gun store decided to auction off an AR-15 assault rifle to raise money for the victims of the Orlando shooting, even though the idea was almost as thoughtful and heartfelt as auctioning off swimming lessons for the survivors of a shipwreck. The idea was scrapped at the last minute, not because of the monstrous lack of sensitivity in auctioning off an item almost identical to the one used to murder the victims, but because of the questionable legality of a business that's not a non-profit running a raffle in Illinois. Here in Florida, we're still heartbroken in the aftermath of the Orlando nightclub massacre. Surely the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history will prompt some kind of action, some kind of common sense legislation on the flood of weapon sales in this country. Well, on the morning immediately after the shooting, Governor Rick Scott met with reporters. See, the governor's been to the beach. And was asked what kind of policy actions he would take to protect the citizens of Florida. Well, he repeatedly insisted that there would be plenty of time for that later, just like in the past, but for right now, quote, the most important thing we can do is pray for everybody. Pray for everyone. That's become a very popular sentiment in this country after a terrible event like this, here and in other communities. But what about all the people who've been praying for an end to all this gun violence? So how about some actual action? Any action, Governor. You're the top elected official in this state. If all you're going to do is referral requests for help to the Home Office, well, what are we paying you for? Are you planning on revealing all of the Pokestops in America before you leave? Because if not, you don't really seem to be contributing anything here. Well, here's Senator Marco Rubio. He's arrived at the scene. He's a powerful senator in the most developed nation in the world, the only one where this happens on a regular basis. Senator, what do you have?
As Americans, we're heartbroken. As I've told all the law enforcement here already, this could have happened anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, today was Orlando's turn.
Orlando's turn? The only thing I find scarier than the inevitability with which a U.S. senator seems to regard mass shootings in this country is how many of us have become unwilling ticket holders in this national lottery of flying lead. A Pew Research poll taken just a year ago shows that 85% of Americans from both parties support expanding background checks and keeping people with mental illnesses from buying guns. Well, at least one positive thing came from the horrible events in Orlando. Just days after the shooting, Senate Democrats introduced new legislation designed to keep guns out of the hands of anyone reasonably suspected by the government of being a terrorist or who is already on the terrorist watch list. I mean, who wants terrorists getting their hands on guns? Everybody can get behind that, right? And it turns out not so much. That measure and three others were all voted down. Oh, and here we have C-SPAN coverage of how that debate went. That looks about right. Well, I'm sure we can always count on the Coast Guard to save us. And that's a likely story. I'm Grafton Stringer. Hope to see you back next time.